Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that everything you had been fighting for, everything you had been promising your family, and everything you had been holding onto as the symbol of your future was gone in an instant. That gut-wrenching feeling is exactly what Kody and Robyn Brown experienced when the news broke that the court had finally made its decision. Coyote Pass, the land that had been the centerpiece of their dreams, their arguments, and their promises, was no longer theirs to control. In a shocking twist that sent shockwaves through the entire Sister Wives universe, the court ordered the immediate sale of Coyote Pass. It wasn't just another setback. It wasn't just another fight. This was the final blow, the one that stripped away the last hope of Kody's so-called legacy. The once promising piece of property, the land that was supposed to unite a fractured family, was now being ripped out of their hands, leaving nothing but dust, debt, and disappointment behind. For years, Kody painted Coyote Pass as his master plan, the grand vision of a united family compound, where all four of his wives and their many children would live side by side in harmony. He described it as their future paradise, a piece of Flagstaff that would finally be theirs, where no one could tear them apart. Every family meeting, every tense discussion, every fight seemed to circle back to that same piece of land. It wasn't just dirt and trees. It was a symbol, a promise, and in Kody's mind, a chance to prove that his lifestyle worked. But as the years dragged on, cracks began to show. The family that was supposed to come together on Coyote Pass began to fall apart long before a single brick was ever laid. The truth was, the land was never really about the wives or the children. It was about Kody's control. He clung to Coyote Pass, as if owning it could somehow erase the growing resentment between him and his wives. But promises don't pay bills, and dreams don't stop property taxes from piling up. Month after month, the debts grew, and Kody scrambled to keep up appearances, while the financial reality became impossible to ignore. He begged, pleaded, and even guilt-tripped his wives into contributing their money, insisting that this land was for all of them, for the children, for their future. But deep down, many of them knew the truth. This land was Kody's obsession, not theirs. Christine, the first to walk away, had long seen the warning signs. She watched as Kody's obsession with Coyote Pass consumed him while his relationships with his wives fell apart. She remembered the countless nights of arguing, the endless promises that someday they would all live together on that land. But someday never came. So Christine finally decided that her happiness couldn't wait for a dream that was never going to happen. She packed her things, left Kody, and walked away not just from the marriage, but from Coyote Pass entirely. To her, that land was a curse, not a blessing. Janelle was next to see the writing on the wall. She had put her own money into the land, believing that maybe, just maybe, Kody's dream could become reality. But as the years passed, she realized she was pouring her resources into something that wasn't growing, literally or figuratively. The land sat empty, barren, with nothing but Kody's hollow speeches to show for it. She grew frustrated, not just with the financial strain but with Kody's refusal to face reality. When the debts started mounting, and the tax bills went unpaid, Janelle knew it was only a matter of time before consequences would come crashing down. And now, with the court's decision, she felt both vindicated and heartbroken. Her warnings had been ignored, but she was also watching her own hard-earned money disappear into the void. Meri, always the quiet one, had long ago detached herself from Kody's vision. She was tired of being left out, tired of being the outsider, tired of hearing about a land that never seemed to move past the dreaming stage. When she heard the court's ruling, she wasn't surprised. She had seen the collapse coming long before Kody ever admitted defeat. For Meri, the sale of Coyote Pass was just another reminder of everything she had already lost in this marriage. But for Kody and Robyn, this was more than just land. This was everything. Robyn had stood by Kody through all the chaos, through the separations, through the public backlash. Together, they clung to the belief that Coyote Pass was still theirs, that it was still possible to build their dream home while everyone else doubted. They refused to believe that the cracks in their foundation would ever bring down the house. But the courtroom told a different story. Inside, When the judge's decision was read, Kody's face turned red with rage. He argued, he begged, he tried to convince the court that Coyote Pass was their only hope, their only chance at rebuilding what was left of their family. He claimed that selling it would destroy everything. But the judge wasn't swayed. The law was the law, and the facts were undeniable. The Browns had failed to manage the property. The debts were piling too high, and there was no path forward except through an immediate sale. Robyn, meanwhile, broke down in tears. She clutched Kody's hand, sobbing as she realized that the one thing she thought would keep her family together was slipping away for good. She pleaded for more time, pleaded for another chance, but her words fell on deaf ears. The ruling was final. The land would be sold, and there was nothing they could do about it. The emotional weight of that moment cannot be overstated. For Kody, Coyote Pass was more than just dirt. It was his proof to the world that his lifestyle, his choices, his vision of family could succeed. Losing it wasn't just about losing money or land. It was about losing face. It was about admitting that everything he had promised had fallen apart. For Robyn, it was the end of the last shred of hope that maybe, someday, their family could come back together. Without Coyote Pass, what was left? The financial fallout was brutal. The proceeds from the sale wouldn't even go fully to Kody and Robyn. First, the back taxes had to be paid. Then came the debts. Then came the lawyers. By the time it was all said and done, the couple was left with only a fraction of what they had once believed the land was worth. It wasn't just a financial loss. It was a financial disaster. The empire Kody thought he was building had turned into ashes, leaving him scrambling to figure out how to support the lifestyle he had promised Robyn. Outside the courtroom, reactions spread like wildfire. Christine, safe in her new life, reportedly celebrated privately, saying that karma had finally caught up to Kody. Janelle felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth had come out, but sadness that so much of her money and time had been wasted. Meri, unsurprised, simply shook her head. To them, the court's ruling wasn't shocking. It was inevitable. Fans of Sister Wives lit up social media with their reactions. Some called it justice, pointing out that Kody had ignored warnings and neglected his family's needs for too long. Others said it was heartbreaking, that no matter how you feel about Kody, watching someone lose everything is painful. But one thing was certain. This was the biggest downfall Kody and Robyn had ever faced. Once seen as the strong couple, the united front, they were now the faces of failure. The couple who lost it all. And that's the most devastating part. Coyote Pass wasn't just land. It was supposed to be the proof that the Browns could endure, that they could thrive even in the face of challenges. Instead, it became the symbol of their collapse. What began as a dream ended in a courtroom, with a judge's order that stripped away not just property but pride, unity, and hope. The Browns' story will never be the same again. With Coyote Pass gone, there is no going back, no rebuilding, no pretending that the dream is still alive. Kody and Robyn are left standing in the ruins, holding on to each other, but with nothing else left to hold on to. The land is gone. The family is gone. The dream is gone. All that remains is the bitter reality that sometimes, no matter how tightly you cling to something, you can still lose it all in the blink of an eye. Coyote Pass was supposed to be a dream. That's what Kody Brown kept telling his wives, his children, and even the cameras that followed their every move. He painted the picture over and over again. A wide stretch of Arizona land, where the Browns would finally settle once and for all. No more moving from state to state. No more temporary rentals. No more splitting up across different cities. On that land, he promised, they would build 4 massive homes, each wife having her own space, yet all close enough to live in unity. It was a vision he repeated so many times that it became almost a mantra, a chant meant to convince everyone around him that it was worth the sacrifices, worth the debt, worth the wait. But the dream that Kody spun so confidently eventually turned into the family's greatest nightmare. When the Browns first bought Coyote Pass, there was a sense of excitement in the air. Even the wives who had doubts tried to believe in Kody's vision. They walked the land, imagining where their houses might stand, where their kids would run, where they might one day watch sunsets together. At least on the surface, it looked like hope. But beneath that surface, cracks were already forming. The wives were skeptical. The children weren't entirely on board. and Kody's plan seemed more like a sketch than a solid blueprint. Still, Kody pushed the dream hard, insisting that one day it would all make sense. One day they'd look back and realize it was worth it. But dreams don't pay for property taxes, and promises don't keep construction crews working. What followed was years of stalled plans, unpaid bills, and endless arguments about money. The dream of 4 homes never even made it past paper. Nothing was built. The only thing that grew on Coyote Pass was tension. Every family discussion about the land turned into a fight. One wife wanted progress, another was frustrated about finances, and another felt completely left out. Meanwhile, Kody kept insisting it would all work out. He clung to the vision so tightly that he couldn't see reality closing in on him. Christine was the first to see the nightmare clearly. She had been patient, hopeful even. But as time dragged on, her patience turned into bitterness. She looked at that land and didn't see a future anymore. She saw a prison. She saw years wasted on a promise that never materialized. Every time Kody brought up Coyote Pass, it was like salt in an open wound. To Christine, the dream was already dead, long before the court order. That land represented not togetherness, but loneliness, frustration, and broken promises. When she finally made the decision to leave, it wasn't just Kody she was leaving behind. It was the land too. She wanted nothing to do with it anymore. Janelle, ever practical, had poured her own money into the land. She wanted to believe that maybe she could secure something tangible for herself and her children. But what she got instead was endless stress. She watched as the property sat empty while the bills kept piling up. She begged Kody to face reality, to start building something, anything, before it was too late. But Kody's excuses never stopped. He'd say it wasn't the right time, or they didn't have enough money yet, or that unity had to come first before construction. It was always something, and Janelle grew more and more frustrated. The dream that was supposed to bring her family closer only pushed them further apart. And then there was Meri, always the outsider, always on the edge of Kody's attention. She had the least attachment to the land of all. For her, Coyote Pass was just another excuse Kody used to keep the family tied to him. She didn't believe in it, didn't trust it, and didn't see herself building a future there. But even she couldn't avoid being pulled into the nightmare, because as long as she was part of the family, Coyote Pass was always part of the conversation. She smiled on camera, walked the land with the others. But inside she knew it was nothing more than a dream that would never come true. Robyn, though, clung to the dream as desperately as Kody did. She cried over it, fought for it, and defended it against the other wives' doubts. To her, Coyote Pass was the last chance at holding the family together. She believed that if they could just build there, if they could just make it happen, maybe the fractures in their relationships could heal. Maybe her children and Kody's children could finally grow up side by side, united instead of divided. Robyn never let go of the dream, even when it was crumbling in front of her. That's what made the eventual nightmare all the more devastating for her. As the years passed, the dream of Coyote Pass became less about the family and more about Kody's pride. He couldn't admit that it wasn't working. He couldn't accept that his vision had failed. Every time the wives questioned him, he doubled down, insisting that they just needed to trust him. But trust doesn't build homes, and pride doesn't pay for land. The wives started drifting away, emotionally and physically. Christine left. Janelle pulled back. Meri detached, and yet Kody and Robyn still held on to the dream like it was the only thing keeping them afloat. The nightmare became official when the financial problems reached their peak. The property taxes were behind. The debts were mounting. The land wasn't producing anything but stress. It was no longer a dream. It was a burden, an anchor dragging the family down. And when the court finally stepped in and ordered the immediate sale, the dream officially turned into a nightmare that couldn't be escaped. For Kody, this was a personal humiliation. The man who had bragged about his vision, who had insisted that his way of life worked, was now being forced to watch his dream be sold off by order of the court. For Robyn, it was heartbreak. She had tied so much of her hope and faith to Coyote Pass, believing that somehow it could fix the unfixable. But when the court's ruling came down, she realized the nightmare was real. The land was gone, the dream was gone, and the family was more broken than ever. What makes this story so tragic is that Coyote Pass could have been something beautiful. If the Browns had come together, If they had worked as a team, if Kody had listened instead of dictated, maybe it would have worked. Maybe there would have been homes, children playing, wives living side by side. Maybe the dream could have been real. But instead, it became a symbol of everything that went wrong. It became the nightmare that tore them apart. And now, when people look at Coyote Pass, they don't see a family compound. They don't see unity or love or promise. They see failure. They see broken dreams. They see the nightmare that ended the Browns' story. For years, the Browns tried to keep their problems with Coyote Pass hidden under a blanket of excuses. Every time a new season of their story unfolded, Kody repeated the same old line. It's just not time yet. He would stand on that dusty piece of Arizona land, waving his arms, as if painting a picture in the air of the beautiful future that was surely coming. 4 houses, 4 wives, dozens of children visiting, a legacy that would last for generations. But behind the curtain, the bills were stacking higher than his promises, and the cracks in the dream were starting to split wide open. The property taxes fell behind, and instead of progress, the family faced paperwork and deadlines. Coyote Pass wasn't building unity, it was building debt. And when debt builds long enough, the law eventually has to step in. That's exactly what happened when the court finally got involved. What was once Kody's private mess suddenly became a very public judgment. The land that was supposed to unite his family had now become a legal battlefield, and there was no escape. It started with notices, those dreaded envelopes reminding them that payments hadn't been made. Each time, Kody brushed it off. He told Robyn it would get handled. He told the others it wasn't their concern anymore. He acted as though he was in control. But control was the one thing he didn't have. Behind the scenes, lawyers began filing paperwork. Government officials started marking deadlines, and the whispers of foreclosure and forced sale grew louder. Still, Kody pretended everything was fine, as if denial could buy him more time. The wives who had already distanced themselves, Christine and Janelle, saw the storm brewing. Christine, free from the marriage, could only shake her head as she watched from afar. She knew this was coming. She had predicted it years ago. Kody's pride was always bigger than his pocketbook. And now the bill was due. Janelle, who still had ties to the property because of her financial contributions, grew more anxious. She had put real money into that land. Her investment was at risk, and she knew that once the court got involved, no amount of Kody's charm or excuses would protect it. Meri, already detached emotionally, sat quietly, unsurprised. She had stopped believing in Coyote Pass a long time ago. And the legal trouble was just the final nail in the coffin. But for Kody and Robyn, the legal papers felt like a slap in the face. Robyn cried when the notice came that the case was officially moving forward. She begged Kody to find a way out, to somehow fix it before it went to court. Kody, puffing up his chest, told her he had it under control, that he would fight for their land, that no judge was going to take away his dream. But when the day of reckoning arrived, and they sat in that courtroom, the reality was clear. This was a battle they couldn't win. The courtroom was packed with tension. Lawyers filed in with stacks of documents. The judge looked down at the case with a stern face. And Kody, sitting there with Robyn at his side, tried to muster the confidence he once carried so easily. He argued that the land was essential for his family, that delays had been caused by personal struggles, that given more time he could make it work. He painted the same picture he had painted for years. Only this time, instead of wives and children, he was selling it to a judge who wasn't moved by emotion or dreams. The lawyers representing the debts laid everything out in black and white: unpaid taxes, missed payments, lack of progress, no clear financial plan. Every excuse Kody had ever given was shredded apart in that room. For the first time, the fantasy of Coyote Pass was stripped down to the cold numbers. And the numbers didn't lie. The Browns had failed to maintain the land. They had failed to keep their promises. And now the law demanded an answer. Robyn cried quietly beside him, clutching his hand as if holding on could change the outcome. She whispered to him that it wasn't fair, that the court didn't understand what the land meant to them, but fairness had nothing to do with it. This wasn't about emotion. This was about responsibility. and responsibility was something Kody had avoided for far too long. The moment the judge read the ruling, the room fell silent. Coyote Pass would be sold. Not in a year. Not after more delays. Immediately, the word echoed like a hammer striking down on Kody's chest. Immediate, the one thing he feared most. Losing control was happening right there in front of him. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. His arguments meant nothing. His promises meant nothing. His dream meant nothing. The law had spoken. For Kody, that ruling wasn't just about losing land. It was about losing face. He had spent years convincing not only his family, but also viewers across the country, that he had it all under control. He was the man with the vision, the one who knew what was best for everyone. And now, in the cold light of a courtroom, that illusion shattered. The land was gone. The dream was gone. The pride he had wrapped himself in was ripped away in a matter of minutes. Robyn's tears turned into sobs as the weight of the decision sank in. She had clung to Coyote Pass as the last chance of bringing the family back together, the last hope that maybe, someday they could all live in peace. But with the ruling, that hope evaporated. The family wasn't coming back. The land wasn't staying theirs. All the crying, all the pleading, all the fighting, it was over. The court had spoken, and there was no more time left. The devastation followed them out of that courtroom. Cameras weren't rolling inside, but the story spread fast. News outlets reported on the ruling. Fans of Sister Wives flooded social media with reactions, and the narrative shifted overnight. Kody and Robyn weren't the visionaries anymore. They weren't the strong, united couple, holding everything together. They were the couple who had lost everything. The faces of a downfall everyone else saw coming, but they refused to admit. And that's the brutal truth about Coyote Pass. It was never really about the land. It was about the image Kody tried so hard to protect. He wanted to show the world that his family was strong, that his way of life worked, that he could hold it all together. But the court didn't see a visionary. The court saw unpaid taxes, mounting debt, and a failed plan. They saw a man who promised too much and delivered nothing. And in the end, the law doesn't care about dreams. The law cares about facts. The judge's ruling didn't just force the sale of Coyote Pass. It forced Kody to face the reality he had been running from for years. His family was gone. His finances were in ruins. His dream had turned to dust. And now, even the land itself, the symbol of everything he claimed to stand for, was being taken away. That's what made the court's involvement so devastating. It wasn't just about dirt and trees. It was about stripping Kody of the one thing he thought no one could take from him: his vision of the future. But in that courtroom, stripped of excuses and stripped of pride, the truth came crashing down. Coyote Pass was no longer his. And neither was the dream. The moment the judge's words left their lips, Kody Brown felt like the ground beneath him gave way. For years he had fought tooth and nail to keep Coyote Pass in his control, weaving stories about a future that never arrived, convincing Robyn and at times even himself that everything would one day fall into place. But when the ruling came down ordering the immediate sale of the property, all those years of excuses, all the desperate attempts to hold on to a crumbling dream, shattered right there in that courtroom. Kody sat frozen, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process what had just happened. Across the room, Robyn clutched his hand with a grip so tight it was almost painful. Her eyes filled with tears. Her shoulders shook, and her entire body seemed to collapse under the weight of what they had just lost. For Kody, anger was the first reaction. He clenched his fists, leaned forward and tried to argue even after the decision was final. His voice trembled with fury as he told the judge they didn't understand. That Coyote Pass wasn't just some piece of land. That this was about family, about legacy, about keeping something sacred for generations to come. He spoke with the same passion he had used for years to convince his wives and children, but this time it fell flat. The courtroom wasn't a family meeting. It wasn't a TV confessional. It was the law, and the law didn't bend for emotion. No amount of shouting or chest beating could change what was already sealed in ink on the papers before him. Robyn broke down beside him, burying her face in her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her sobs echoed softly in the room, a painful contrast to Kody's angry voice. She begged the judge for more time, pleaded that they could make it work if just given another chance. Her words came out between gasps, filled with desperation, filled with the kind of fear only someone who has watched everything slip through their fingers could know. She wasn't just crying for the land. She was crying for the future she thought it represented. She was crying for the image of her children playing in backyards that would never exist. For the vision of holiday dinners on a property that would no longer be theirs. For her, this wasn't just a financial loss. It was the death of the last fragile hope that maybe their family could heal. But no amount of crying, begging or bargaining mattered anymore. The judge's face remained firm, unmoved, and the gavel that brought the session to an end felt like a thunderclap sealing their fate. They were out of time. The dream was over. The property would be sold. When the couple walked out of that courtroom, their emotions spilled over. Witnesses described Kody as pacing furiously, muttering under his breath about betrayal, about unfair treatment, about how no one understood the bigger picture. His face was red, his voice sharp, his entire body shaking with the kind of rage that comes not just from losing but from being forced to face the truth. Robyn, on the other hand, was crumbling. Her tears hadn't stopped. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks. Her body leaned into Kody as though she couldn't stand on her own. She whispered over and over, "What are we going to do now?" as though saying it enough times might summon an answer. For Kody, desperation took the form of denial. He immediately began talking about appeals, about fighting the decision, about somehow convincing someone higher up to reverse the ruling. He clung to any shred of possibility that this wasn't the end, that he still had a chance to control the outcome. But deep down, he knew it was futile. The paperwork was already in motion. The sale was already being arranged. This wasn't something he could charm or bully his way out of. For Robyn, desperation looked like fear. She wasn't worried about appeals or court battles. She was worried about survival. She asked Kody over and over again how they would pay the bills, how they would keep a roof over their heads, how they would recover from the financial and emotional blow. To her, Coyote Pass wasn't just dirt and property lines. It had been a shield against the reality of their fractured family. Without it, she saw nothing but an empty, uncertain future. Their desperation also revealed just how isolated they had become. Christine, Janelle, and Meri weren't coming to their rescue. They weren't standing in the hallway offering support. They weren't fighting alongside them. Those bonds had long since been broken. And when Kody and Robyn looked around, there was no one left to share the burden. They were alone. Two people clinging to each other as the empire they once tried to build collapsed around them. The desperation carried into their home life as well. Behind closed doors, Kody ranted late into the night about how unfair it was. Pacing rooms, raising his voice, replaying the court scene in his head again and again. Robyn cried in silence, rocking herself on the couch, trying to make sense of what life would look like without the land. Their children, too, felt the tension. They saw their parents unraveling, heard the arguments, felt the fear in the air. For them, Coyote Pass had always been more of a concept than a reality. But watching their parents lose it so publicly made them question what stability they had left. In the days that followed, desperation turned to dread as the practical consequences set in. The court-ordered sale meant that any money from the property would first go to covering back taxes and debts. Kody and Robyn wouldn't walk away with a fortune. They'd walk away with scraps, leftovers after everyone else had taken their share. And with those scraps, they were supposed to rebuild a life. It wasn't just humiliating. It was terrifying. Kody tried to put on a brave face in front of Robyn, talking about new opportunities, about how maybe they could buy something smaller, maybe start fresh. But the confidence in his voice didn't match the panic in his eyes. Robyn saw through it. She knew he didn't have a plan. She knew the man who once promised he could lead a family of over 20 people was now floundering, lost, and unsure of what to do next. Her desperation wasn't just about the land. It was about realizing that the man she had put her faith in, the man she had defended against criticism, had failed her in the one way that mattered most, providing a future they could count on. Their desperation spilled into the public eye as well. Fans who once watched the Browns with fascination now watched with a mix of shock and pity. Social media erupted with reactions. Some mocked Kody's arrogance, saying he had finally gotten what he deserved. Others felt sympathy for Robyn, pointing out that she seemed to be the only one left carrying the emotional weight of the collapse. Everywhere they turned, they were being judged, criticized, and dissected. The spotlight that once made them reality TV stars now burned them alive with scrutiny. And yet, through it all, Kody and Robyn clung to each other. They had no choice. Everyone else had left. Everyone else had distanced themselves. They were the last ones standing in a storm that had wiped away everything else. Their desperation bound them together, but it also suffocated them. Every tear Robyn cried, every angry word Kody shouted, every moment of silence between them was another reminder of how much they had lost and how little they had left. In the end, desperation wasn't just an emotion for Kody and Robyn, it was their new reality. They lived it, breathed it, and carried it with them every second of the day. The court's order had taken away the land, but it had also taken away something deeper: the illusion of control, the hope of unity, the promise of a future. And without those things, all that remained was the desperate struggle to figure out what came next in a life that no longer looked anything like the dream they had clung to for so long. Money. It's the one thing that has always haunted the Brown family, even back when they seemed untouchable on television. And now, after the court's ruling on Coyote Pass, the financial nightmare is no longer something Kody and Robyn can push into the shadows. It is front and center, suffocating them, wrapping its cold hands around their future, and refusing to let go. The financial fallout from the court's decision didn't just sting, it devastated them, stripping away illusions, exposing the raw truth of years of reckless decisions, and leaving Kody and Robyn staring into an abyss they never thought they'd face. The moment the gavel hit, and the order for the sale became reality, it was clear that money would dictate what came next. But what Kody and Robyn hadn't fully grasped was that the sale of Coyote Pass wasn't going to hand them a golden parachute. Quite the opposite. It was going to drain them dry. Taxes had been piling up on the land for years, debts connected to the property lingered like a storm cloud, and the fees connected to the forced sale were stacked against them. When all of that was carved out of the proceeds, there wasn't going to be a windfall. There was going to be leftovers. Small scraps compared to what they once bragged about. Kody tried, at first, to spin the situation. He sat at the kitchen table with Robyn, papers scattered everywhere, muttering about how maybe they could use whatever money was left as a down payment on something else. He sketched out half-baked ideas about new investments, new land, new beginnings. His words tumbled out quickly, as though talking fast enough might hide the panic underneath. But Robyn wasn't buying it. She sat across from him, eyes red from crying, staring at the numbers in front of her. The math didn't lie. No matter how many times Kody tried to bend the story, the reality screamed back. They were broke. The sale of Coyote Pass wasn't a rebirth. It was the final nail in the coffin of a financial strategy that had been crumbling for years. Kody had always lived with the mindset that things would somehow work out, that if he just pushed a little harder, talked a little louder, dreamed a little bigger, the money would appear. But television checks had slowed, the family fractured, and the resources that once flowed like water had dried into dust. Without the show's income at its peak, without the combined financial strength of 4 wives pooling resources, and without a plan beyond empty promises, Kody and Robyn now stood alone, exposed and cornered. The fallout wasn't just numbers on a page. It was the crushing weight of bills stacking up in the mailbox. It was the phone calls from creditors that they let go to voicemail. It was the sinking feeling when their children asked about the future, and they didn't have answers. Every day became a reminder of how much they had lost, how much was slipping away, and how little control they truly had. Kody raged against the situation. He stomped around the house, shouting about unfairness, about betrayal, about how people had sabotaged him. He blamed Christine for walking away, blamed Janelle for pushing back on his financial decisions, blamed Meri for not being invested anymore. In his mind, the fallout was everyone else's fault. He refused to admit that his own choices, the stubbornness, the arrogance, the refusal to listen, were the real reason everything was collapsing. For Kody, that meant admitting weakness, and weakness was something he couldn't face. Robyn, however, felt the fallout in a different way. She wasn't angry, she was terrified. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running numbers through her head like a broken calculator. She thought about groceries, about mortgages, about medical bills, about tuition for the kids. Her anxiety spilled into every corner of her life, and she couldn't shake the constant worry that they were on the brink of losing even more. Robyn cried not just for what they lost at Coyote Pass, but for the day-to-day survival she now had to figure out. She once believed Kody would always lead them through, that he would make sure the family thrived. But now she saw the truth. He had no plan. He never did, and the fallout proved it. The financial disaster also highlighted just how fractured their relationships with the other wives had become. Christine, secure in her independence, was building a life on her own terms. Janelle, though still struggling with finances herself, at least had clarity and a sense of freedom. Meri, distant but determined, was carving her own path. Meanwhile, Kody and Robyn were left holding the bag, drowning in debt, weighed down by property that once symbolized hope, but now represented failure. The others had let go, but Kody couldn't. He kept replaying the past, clinging to the idea that somehow they should still be a united front. But money has a way of exposing the cracks that were always there, and for Kody and Robyn, the cracks had become craters. The fallout wasn't just financial, it was emotional and psychological. Kody's pride was shattered. He once boasted about being a leader, about guiding his family to prosperity. Now he couldn't even keep hold of the one property that was supposed to symbolize that vision. He felt humiliated, not just in front of his family, but in front of the world. Robyn, meanwhile, felt betrayed. She had trusted Kody's promises, trusted his leadership, and now she was left wondering if she had been nothing more than a believer in a story that was never real. Every choice moving forward was colored by that desperation. Even small expenses, groceries, school supplies, gas, turned into stress-filled discussions. They cut corners, tried to save pennies where they could, but the hole was too deep. They couldn't climb out. The land was gone, the debts lingered, and the future they thought they were securing had evaporated like smoke. The financial fallout also forced Kody to face something he had been avoiding for years. The show couldn't save them forever. The paychecks weren't what they used to be. The audience was no longer enchanted by the dream of plural marriage, and the narrative had shifted from curiosity to chaos. Reality TV fame had an expiration date, and for Kody that date had passed. He had built his entire life around the idea that being on camera would sustain him. But now the cameras captured his downfall instead of his success. For Robyn, the fallout was even crueler. She never wanted to be in the spotlight in the first place. She had been pulled into the chaos by her love for Kody and her hope for family unity. Now she was paying the steepest price, tied to a man who couldn't provide, a family that had crumbled, and finances that looked like a battlefield. She wept not only for herself but for her children, who were growing up in the shadow of dreams that never materialized. And yet, despite the disaster, despite the mounting bills, despite the humiliation, Kody clung to denial. He continued to talk about new beginnings, about how maybe they could still buy another property, about how somehow, some way they could rebuild. But even as he said the words, his eyes betrayed him. He knew the truth. Robyn knew the truth. The financial fallout wasn't something they could recover from easily. It wasn't a setback. It was the collapse of everything they had been trying to hold together for more than a decade. The court's order didn't just sell Coyote Pass. It sold the last illusion Kody and Robyn had left. And as the money slipped through their fingers, as the bills continued to pile up, they were left standing in the rubble of their own choices, wondering if there was any way forward at all. The news spread like wildfire. One moment, it was just Kody and Robyn sitting in that courtroom, crushed under the weight of the judge's words. The next, the entire Brown family knew. And if losing Coyote Pass was a crushing blow for Kody and Robyn, the ripple effect of that loss hit the rest of the family in ways neither of them expected. Everyone had a reaction. and every reaction peeled back another layer of the fractured history that had brought them all to this point. Christine was the first to hear. She wasn't in the courtroom. She wasn't even in the same state. But when the call came, when someone told her that the judge had ordered Coyote Pass sold, she froze for a moment, and then something rare happened. She laughed. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was a laugh of pure release. For years that land had been hanging over her like a cloud. She had endured countless conversations where Kody insisted that everything would work out once they built on Coyote Pass. She had been told again and again that she just needed to wait, to hold on, to believe. And she had waited, and waited until the waiting nearly destroyed her. But now, the land was gone. The dream was dead. And for Christine that meant freedom in a way she hadn't felt in years. She shook her head, smiled, and told those around her, "I knew this was coming. I just didn't know when." But underneath her smile, there was also sadness, not for Kody, not for Robyn, but for the years of wasted time, for the promises made to her children that never came true, for the countless fights over money, over trust, over a piece of land that ended up slipping through their fingers anyway. She thought about her daughters, especially the younger ones, who had believed in that dream, who had pictured their futures on that property. Christine was relieved, the nightmare was over, but she couldn't help but feel a sting of bitterness, that it took a courtroom to end what Kody never could. Janelle's reaction was quieter, but in many ways it cut deeper. She had been the one who believed in Coyote Pass the longest. She had walked that land, stood under the sun, and told herself that one day her home would be there. She had been the one to push for progress, the one to scrape together money, the one to try to make the dream real. When she heard the court's ruling, her heart sank. Not because she wanted to go back, not because she missed Kody, but because all her effort, all her sacrifices had been for nothing. She thought about the late nights balancing bills, the stress of trying to contribute while also keeping her own head above water. She thought about the hope she had tried so hard to cling to, even when Kody's leadership was crumbling, and then she thought about how right she had been to finally walk away. The ruling confirmed it. She had made the right choice. If she had stayed, if she had continued to throw her money into that land, she would have been dragged down into the same pit Kody and Robyn were drowning in now. Instead, she was free. Struggling, yes, but free. She shook her head, sighed deeply, and told a friend, "It's over." And honestly, it needed to be. Meri, on the other hand, had a different kind of reaction. For so long, she had been sidelined, ignored, treated like an afterthought in the family. She had watched from the shadows, while Kody poured his attention into Robyn, while the dream of Coyote Pass consumed every conversation. By the time the court ruling came down, Meri had already detached herself emotionally. She wasn't invested in the land anymore. She wasn't invested in Kody's promises. When she heard the news, her face remained calm, almost expressionless. But deep down, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: vindication. She remembered the moments when she had been dismissed, when her concerns about money or fairness were brushed aside. She remembered the loneliness of sitting in family meetings, her voice drowned out by louder ones. And now, here it was, the proof that Kody's vision had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors. She didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat, but she felt a quiet strength, a sense that walking her own path had been the only way forward. She whispered to herself, "I knew it wouldn't last." The children's reactions, however, were the most heartbreaking. For years they had been told that Coyote Pass was their future. They had been shown the land, told which plots might be theirs, encouraged to dream about what life would look like once homes were built. Even if some of them had stopped believing in it long ago, the ruling made it final. That dream wasn't just delayed anymore, it was dead. Some of the older kids, hardened by years of disappointment, shrugged it off with bitter jokes. Figures, one said, rolling their eyes. "Classic dad." But the younger ones, they cried. They asked their parents why. They wanted to know what had gone wrong, and those questions cut deeper than any judge's ruling ever could. Robyn's kids were hit the hardest. To them, Coyote Pass wasn't just land, it was a promise their mother had clung to, a vision she had painted over and over again. They had grown up believing that one day they'd live close to their siblings, that the family would finally come together in one place. When the ruling came down, and they saw their mother collapse into tears, it shattered them. They didn't just lose land. They lost the security of believing in their parents' promises. They saw the cracks, the weakness, the desperation, and they were old enough to understand what it meant. Even outside the family, the reactions poured in. Fans of the show, people who had followed the Browns for over a decade, had plenty to say. Social media lit up with commentary. Some were merciless, pointing out that Kody's arrogance had finally caught up with him. Others felt sympathy for Robyn, saying she seemed like the one paying the heaviest price for decisions she didn't fully control. Some mourned the loss of what Coyote Pass could have been, a rare chance for the family to truly come together. But most agreed on one thing. This was the end of an era, and that's exactly how it felt inside the family. An ending. Christine, Janelle, and Meri had already walked away from Kody, but the sale of Coyote Pass made it official in a way that no divorce papers or announcements ever could. The land had been the last tether, the last shared dream, the last excuse for holding on. Without it, there was nothing binding them together anymore. The family that once boasted about unity was now scattered, fractured, and broken beyond repair. Kody and Robyn felt that isolation immediately. They waited for calls of support that never came. They looked for sympathy in the faces of family members who had already moved on, and every silence, every unanswered message, every polite but distant word from the others was a reminder that they were truly alone now. The land was gone, the family was gone, and all that remained was the echo of what could have been. The family reactions weren't loud explosions of anger or celebration. They were quieter, sharper, more cutting. They revealed the truth that had been building for years. The Browns were no longer a family. They were individuals, survivors of a failed dream, each moving forward in their own way. For some, like Christine, it was liberation. For others, like Janelle, it was bittersweet validation. For Meri, it was quiet vindication. And for the children, it was a painful lesson in broken promises. And through it all, Kody and Robyn sat in the ruins, waiting for a support system that no longer existed, grappling with the reality that the people they once called family had already written them out of their stories. When the ruling hit the courtroom, it didn't just stay there. It spilled out into the streets, into homes, onto phones and laptops across the country. The sale of Coyote Pass wasn't just a private family matter anymore, it was a public spectacle. And the public? They had plenty to say. In fact, the backlash that came roaring in was so loud, so relentless, that it felt like Kody and Robyn weren't just fighting the court or their family, but an entire world that had finally had enough. The story spread like wildfire. The moment the court order was confirmed, news outlets picked it up first, plastering headlines across their sites. Court orders Brown family's Coyote Pass sold. Kody and Robyn lose everything. The end of a dream. Within hours, it wasn't just Sister Wives fans reading the news, it was everyone. On social media, hashtags about the Browns began trending, memes popped up within minutes, and video clips of Kody's old speeches about Coyote Pass resurfaced, but this time with captions mocking how empty those promises had turned out to be. The public had watched Kody for years, had listened to him brag, boast, and declare himself a leader. They had seen him insist that he was building a legacy, that Coyote Pass was the family's future, and now that it was gone, people didn't hold back. They tore him apart, piece by piece, word by word. Comments flooded in, saying things like, "This is karma catching up," and "You can't treat people like pawns and expect to win in the end." Others compared his downfall to a Shakespearean tragedy, saying that his pride had been his undoing. The backlash wasn't quiet. It was brutal, unforgiving, and relentless. Robyn wasn't spared either. For years, many viewers had labeled her the favorite wife, the one who got the best treatment, the one who seemed to always have Kody's full attention while the others were left behind. And now, with Kody and Robyn left holding the wreckage of Coyote Pass, the public saw it as poetic justice. Comments poured in about how Robyn had won Kody but lost everything else. People accused her of enabling his arrogance, of defending him when she should have been questioning him, of building her future on a dream house of cards. Some even went as far as calling her the last wife standing in a castle of sand. The backlash cut deep, and for Robyn, who never wanted the spotlight in the first place, it was overwhelming. But what made the public backlash even more devastating was that it wasn't just ridicule, it was exposure. Old clips began resurfacing. Old interviews where Kody promised that the land would unite the family, where he looked directly into the camera and insisted that everyone was on board, that it was only a matter of time before they were all living in harmony on Coyote Pass. Fans spliced those clips side by side with the court's ruling, turning his words into a cruel punchline. One big house, he had once said with conviction. One big dream. Now those words played on loop, mocked by strangers across the internet. The memes were merciless. Pictures of tumbleweeds blowing across empty dirt lots labeled Coyote Pass 2025. Screenshots of Kody pointing his finger with captions like, "Trust me, I have a plan." Videos edited to show the land fading away like dust, with Robyn crying in the background. It wasn't just the fans of the show, it was internet culture as a whole latching onto their downfall and turning it into entertainment. For Kody, the public backlash was unbearable. He had always craved control, always wanted to shape how people saw him. In his mind, he was the strong leader, the visionary, the man capable of guiding a massive family into something historic. Now, everywhere he looked, people were mocking him, dragging him down, tearing apart the image he had spent years constructing. He paced around the house, furious, slamming his phone down after scrolling through social media, muttering about how people didn't understand, how the media twisted everything, how strangers had no right to judge his life. But the more he raged, the clearer it became. This wasn't something he could fight. The backlash wasn't a single enemy, it was a tidal wave, and he was drowning. Robyn, on the other hand, didn't rage, she broke. The tears that had started in the courtroom never seemed to stop. She read the comments, the cruel jokes, the endless stream of blame aimed at her, and it hollowed her out. She tried to stay away from the internet, but it was everywhere, on TV, in texts from friends, even in whispers at the grocery store. She felt the weight of a nation's judgment pressing down on her shoulders, and the pressure made it hard to breathe. She told Kody one night, through sobs, "They hate me, they don't even know me, and they hate me." And Kody for once had no answer. He couldn't protect her, he couldn't silence them. The world had turned against them, and all he could do was sit in the wreckage with her. What made the backlash sting even more was the way people praised Christine, Janelle and Meri in comparison. Comments flooded in about how the other wives had escaped, how they had built better lives without Kody, how the ruling was proof that leaving him had been the smartest move they ever made. The public hailed Christine as the hero who broke free, cheered Janelle for standing her ground, respected Meri for finding her independence. And every compliment for the ex-wives was a dagger to Kody and Robyn, a reminder that not only had they lost the land, but they had lost the narrative. They weren't the ones people rooted for anymore. They were the villains in their own story. The backlash also hit their children indirectly. Classmates whispered, friends asked questions. Teenagers scrolled through TikTok and saw their family's pain turned into trending jokes. The kids who never asked to be in the spotlight now had to carry the burden of their parents' humiliation. For them, the backlash wasn't funny, it was personal, it was painful, and it made them question whether their family's public life had ever been worth it. Through it all, the cameras kept rolling. Sister Wives had always been about showing the highs and lows of plural marriage, but now the lows were catastrophic, and the world was feasting on every moment. Some fans argued that the backlash was deserved, that after years of arrogance, favoritism, and broken promises, Kody was finally being held accountable. Others worried that the cruelty had gone too far, that mocking people in their lowest moments crossed a line. But regardless of opinion, the backlash only grew, louder and sharper with every passing day. The irony of it all wasn't lost on anyone. For years, Kody had insisted that the family story was about love, about faith, about unity. He wanted their legacy to be one of triumph. But now, the legacy etched into the public's mind was one of downfall, betrayal, and humiliation. And the court's ruling on Coyote Pass was the spark that lit the fire of backlash so strong it might never burn out. For Kody and Robyn, the backlash became a second punishment, one even harsher than the court's decision. Losing land was painful. Losing money was devastating. But losing the respect of the world, losing the chance to shape how their story was told, that was unbearable. It left them exposed, vulnerable, and more isolated than ever before. And as the memes continued, as the comments piled up, as the headlines refused to fade, Kody and Robyn were left to sit in silence, watching as their private despair became public entertainment. They had dreamed of leaving a legacy. Instead, they became a cautionary tale, a story people whispered about when pride finally caught up to someone who thought they were untouchable. There comes a moment when the noise dies down, when the headlines fade, when the courtroom's empty, and when the world stops screaming. But in that quiet, the truth feels heavier than ever. For Kody and Robyn Brown, that quiet moment arrived after the court order, after the family reactions, after the public backlash. When the dust finally settled, when the chatter began to move on to the next story, they were left alone, staring at the rubble of what was once their dream. And that's when the final reality hit them. Coyote Pass was gone, not delayed, not waiting, not sitting there in limbo. Gone. The land that Kody had promised would unite the family, the land Robyn had clung to as proof that the chaos would one day lead to stability, was stripped from their grasp. The papers were signed, the sale was in motion, and the dream that had been stretched across more than a decade had evaporated like smoke in the wind. What was once supposed to be there forever was now someone else's blank canvas. And that realization crushed them in a way no angry comment or mocking meme ever could. For years, Kody had lived on promises. He had promised his wives that plural marriage would be worth it. He had promised his children that they would one day run across their own backyards on Coyote Pass. He had promised Robyn that her sacrifices, her loyalty, her faith in him would pay off. But now, with the land gone, all of those promises were exposed for what they truly were: empty words. Words that sounded powerful in the moment, but dissolved when faced with reality. And when Kody sat alone at night, staring into the dark, that was the weight pressing hardest on his chest. The realization that he had built his life on promises he could never keep. Robyn's reality looked different, but it was just as devastating. For her, the loss wasn't just about dirt and property lines. It was about the image she had built in her mind, the story she had told her children, the hope she had clung to when the family began to fall apart. She had always been the one to cry, the one to beg for peace, the one to ask, "Can't we all just get along?" And when things broke beyond repair, she told herself it was okay because they still had the land, because one day, somehow that land would bring everyone back together. Now that anchor was gone, and in its place she felt something worse than sadness. She felt betrayal, not just by the court, not just by the system, but by Kody himself. She realized that she had built her entire future on a man who never had a plan, who led her into a dream he couldn't deliver, and who left her carrying the pieces when it all collapsed. The final reality also hit their children. It wasn't just about losing Coyote Pass. It was about losing the belief that their parents could hold it all together. For years, they had lived with uncertainty, watching marriages break, seeing siblings move away, hearing whispers of fights behind closed doors. Through it all, they had been told that one day, everything would make sense when they lived together on the land. That hope had been their lifeline. But when the court ripped that away, the children were left with nothing but questions. Questions like, why didn't it work? Why did we fight so hard for nothing? And perhaps the most painful of all, was it ever real? The final reality wasn't just about loss. It was about isolation. Kody and Robyn looked around and realized they were truly alone. Christine was gone, living a new life filled with joy. Janelle had moved on, building her independence. Meri had walked away, forging her own path. Even the children who once looked up to Kody with admiration now looked at him with skepticism, even disappointment. The family that was supposed to be his legacy was fractured beyond repair, and there was no glue strong enough to piece it back together. For Kody, that realization was unbearable. He had always seen himself as a man of destiny, someone chosen to lead, someone who could defy the odds and prove the world wrong. Now he was just a man with nothing left to lead. His pride had carried him for years. But pride couldn't pay the bills. Pride couldn't buy back the land. Pride couldn't fix broken marriages. And so he sat, night after night, replaying his mistakes, but never quite able to admit they were his fault. Even in the final reality, Kody clung to denial, muttering about betrayal, about unfair treatment, about how others had abandoned him. But deep down in the silence of the night, he knew the truth. This wasn't about betrayal, this was about him. Robyn's final reality was quieter but no less heavy. She cried often, not the loud sobs of the courtroom, but the silent tears of someone who knows there is no fixing what has been broken. She watched her children grow wary of promises, watched her husband unravel, watched her own hope disintegrate, and she wondered if she had made the worst mistake of her life by tying her future to his. She loved Kody, yes, but love couldn't build houses on land they no longer owned. Love couldn't shield her children from disappointment. Love couldn't undo the years she had spent defending a man who led her into a dream that ended in ashes. The final reality also extended beyond their home. The public had moved from backlash to apathy. After the memes and the outrage, people began to turn the page, moving on to the next scandal, the next story. But for Kody and Robyn, the world moving on was another kind of punishment, because while the world forgot, they still lived in the wreckage every single day. They couldn't move on. Every bill, every phone call, every glance at their children reminded them of what they had lost. The silence of being forgotten was almost worse than the noise of being mocked. And yet, in some strange way, the final reality brought clarity. For the first time in years, there were no more excuses, no more delays, no more somedays. The dream of Coyote Pass was dead. The idea of a united family was gone. The myth of Kody as the strong leader had crumbled. What was left was the truth. Two people, isolated, struggling, facing a future that was uncertain and frightening. For the first time they had to face life without the illusion of a grand plan. And the question that lingered in the air, heavier than any court ruling, was simple. Could they survive it? Kody tried to muster hope. He spoke about starting fresh, about finding new opportunities, about rebuilding from the ground up. But even as he said the words, his voice lacked conviction. Robyn listened, nodded, but inside she knew. The final reality wasn't about new beginnings. It was about endings. The ending of a dream, the ending of a family, as they once knew it, the ending of a story that had been told for over a decade on national television. And that's the haunting part about the final reality. It doesn't come with fanfare, or a gavel, or headlines. It comes in the quiet moments, when the cameras stop rolling, when the kids go to bed, when the house is silent. It comes when Kody sits in the dark, staring at papers he can't fix, and when Robyn wipes away tears she can't stop. It comes in the silence, after the storm, when the only thing left is the truth. They tried so hard to avoid. Coyote Pass was gone. The dream was gone. The family was gone. And in the end, the final reality wasn't just that Kody and Robyn had lost everything. It was that they never really had it in the first place.